she was playing a hockey match against the boys. She was very determined to win. It was around this time of year, and it was very, very hot. And she sort of collapsed with what everyone sort of thought was, overheating, heat exhaustion. But when she came out from that, she had lost her speech, her memory, we actually didn't realize at that point she lost the ability to walk.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow.
Welcome back, NeuFit Nation, to the Undercurrent podcast. I have two guests today, one of whom, George James, is a physiotherapist, as they say in the UK, over there in the United Kingdom. He was a guest back on episode 101, so he's making his second appearance. And on that episode, we talked about his story, being an elite rugby player, being frustrated with his own injuries, and how that led him into physiotherapy in the first place. And along the way, he got really interested in the nervous system and treating through the lens of neuroscience. So you can imagine that enabled him and me to become fast friends. And now he's been continuing to grow his practice over there in the UK and has been, just really, really sharing some inspiring success stories. And that's a good segue into our conversation today, because we're going to actually talk about one of those success stories. We have Katie joining us from Kenya, and she connected with George because of some challenges that her daughter was dealing with, difficult diagnosis and, a lot of developmental and neurological challenges. So we're going to dive in to that story today. So I'm really excited to hear some of these details about George's journey from the UK down to Kenya. And I'm really looking forward to sharing this with all of you here. So let's start with Katie. So Katie, can you set this up, please? Can you tell us a little bit about Jodie, your daughter, and what led you to look up the Newbie device and get in touch with George in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So it was February last year. She was playing a hockey match against the boys. She was very determined to win, and she's quite competitive, and she was giving her all. And it was around this time of year, and it was very, very hot. And she sort of collapsed with what everyone sort of thought was overheating, heat exhaustion, and she came back round and actually could talk at that point, but got a big fright from it, and then went down and did some convulsions. As far as the teacher that was with her said, it looked like an epileptic sort of fit, but very short. But when she came out from that, she had lost her speech, her memory, we actually didn't realize at that point she lost the ability to walk, because obviously she was, people thought she'd fainted, so they just picked her up and off she was taken to the nurses at school, where I was called. I'm also a teacher at the same school where she's at, so my friend phoned me, my colleague, and said, better come and see Jodie. She's fainted in hockey, like really nice and calm. And I got there, and then she was like, it's a bit more serious than a faint. So Jodie at that point, oh, poor little thing. She couldn't see properly. She couldn't speak. She couldn't remember anything. She lost all her nouns, so names of everything. She knew she could use the word siblings, but had forgotten her brother and sister's name. And we just went into this incredibly crazy turmoil, like at a click of a finger. And then we were in an ambulance. It's 2.5 hour drive to Nairobi to get to the hospital. And we were in hospital, I think, for a week with her. Then, the what I now know to be quite a common FND story, with every test under the sun being done. We were really lucky. We had a lovely neurologist, the only pediatric neurologist actually in East Africa, and she's an incredible doctor. And she was very determined to find out what was going on. And each test she'd come back, she'd say, right, that one was also clear. And my husband and I would be like, oh, well, now what? And every time she said, it's a good thing this test is clear. Because obviously they were looking for, I don't know, brain tumors and all sorts of other things. But once we then ruled out all of these things came out clear, then the question began to be, well, what on earth has happened? And Dr. Farida, she was amazing. She was in touch with neurologists, all, as far as I can tell, all over the world, also looking for answers. And we got to the point because she, lying on the bed, she could kick her legs all over the place. But the moment you got her upright and on her feet, her balance, it was her balance, and you sort of said, come on. And we just, it's quite a blurry memory now, actually. I think probably because it was all quite hectic at the time. Trying to work, because the first thing that was so worrying was the loss of the memory. And then it was only after a day or two when she was then able to get up and about, we were like, oh my goodness, now apparently she can't walk. Yes, so that's sort of the trigger events that happened. And then Dr. Farida, we got discharged because at that point there was not really any point staying in hospital because they couldn't do anything for us. And Jodie was getting very distressed in hospital. She had a cannula thing in her hand and it was very painful. Obviously loads of tests, which were horrible. So we got discharged and with the information, we know it's not a hard wiring problem. Now you've got to look at the soft wiring and find a counsellor. So off we went and went home to Gilgil thinking, gosh, now what? Luckily, because I'm a teacher, we actually have some really talented, incredible people that come and help children at our school anyway. So there's a pediatric physiotherapist who comes, she's from Holland. She comes to school once a week. So she was on with Jodie and, she, again, similar thing, never heard of FND actually either. She was working with Jodie and the progress was there, but, it would have been, it was tiny incremental things we were seeing over months in the end. And then George, when did I get hold? I can't even remember when we got hold of you, George.
No, I mean, when did I came out in May and I think it was...
I think we had to wait 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe, like early April, I reckon, probably.
Yeah. And then there was the waiting for this machine to arrive.
Did you say you had to wait 6 weeks or 6 months?
No, so in the end, by the time George got to us, it was 4 months from beginning to end, because the sort of searching for solutions.
Okay.
But when I found George, he was so booked up, so I had to wait 6 weeks for him to get to Kenya.
That was 6. Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
So George, for many of our listeners for NeuFit are going to be in America, and so we have different terms for some of this category of neurological conditions. So can you translate FND for some of us as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's referred to, so FND stands for Functional Neurological Disorder. It's basically an umbrella term for a group of neurological disorders with no specific, as Katie said, structural cause for the neurological symptoms that someone can experience. And it can vary from motor symptoms, as Jodie obviously experienced, to functional seizures, to even functional tics. There's essentially no limit to the symptoms that someone can experience with FND, and everyone presents very, very differently. So everyone needs very, very different treatment and considerations with the rehab that you end up doing with them.
So some of the conditions that we think of, we might talk about, in children, we might talk about conditions like CP, cerebral palsy, which is different. This is not that, right? That's something from birth, or conditions like MS or ALS. Do those fall under that same? You mentioned FND is kind of an umbrella term. Do those fall under that umbrella, or because those are a little better known and diagnosed, are those different and not necessarily under that umbrella?
Yeah, no, very, very different. Because most of those conditions, if not all of those conditions, have known, although in the case of ALS and things, we don't know exactly what's going on, but we know that there are structural changes happening in the brain with the motor neurons, for example. In MS, you're obviously getting scarring of the myelin sheaths in the nervous system, in the central nervous system. So yeah, there's a structural explanation for the neurological issues that you're experiencing, whereas functional neurological disorders, that umbrella term covers any neurological disorder where there is no structural explanation for the symptoms, or as far as we're aware currently, there's no structural explanations. I have a good feeling that give it 10, 15, 20 years and we will see, we will be able to see what changes are happening. It's just at the moment, the technology doesn't exist, and we're not able to see exactly why the neurological symptoms are occurring.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. That's very clear. And for some of our listeners, I mean, I see from you and talk to people in the UK, so I'm a little bit familiar with these terms, but for some of our listeners in the United States, we will not have heard those. So I appreciate you clarifying that for us. And this is also really interesting because we talk a lot about, at NeuFit, we talk a lot about making the distinction, even in more orthopedic and musculoskeletal injuries, making the distinction between the tissue damage and that neurological response to injury. And so I think, having that, using the language that you both used there, Katie, even talking about the hardware and the software or the wiring, and George, your description there too, it really speaks to that theme that is one of the fundamental concepts, that we teach and that we use in our framework of treating through the NeuFit method. So I appreciate that very much. So, all right. So Katie, you described this situation where Jodie has this episode on the hockey field. So this is field hockey for reference.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear hockey, by default, I think ice hockey. That's my sport. We did talk about, there is one ice rink in Kenya. We talked about that before hitting the record button. But she was playing field hockey, hence it being hot and all that. So just clarifying that too. So you had these cognitive issues with memory and walking and everything. So then there's a period of several months before you connect with George, and then the 6 weeks when you're waiting for George. So can you walk us through a little more detail on what happened with her? I know you said there was just like little bit incremental progress. So by the time George arrived there for this week-long intensive, where was Jodie cognitively and physically?
Yeah, so the amnesia that was but the amnesia and the not walking together was pretty terrifying, actually. You're like, where are we? What on earth's going on? So the amnesia took a while to come back, but each time she met someone again, then all the memories linked to that then sort of came back. So by the time George got here, chatty Jodie was very much in the house. And we're still struggling with these symptoms now. She had other symptoms, slurring of words, sometimes facial tics that you mentioned, George. She gets those still now, and it's evening time always. Her nervous system has just been thrown out of whack, and when we were waiting for George, those symptoms were actually really quite strong as well as the not walking. So the way she was getting around when George got here was she had a little bicycle and she could wheel. So those little toddler bikes. So she could walk herself as long as she was not in an upright position. Her balance was fine. It was so confusing. She could use an exercise bike. So we were doing that every day. So her legs completely worked unless she was put up in an upright position, standing on her own feet. And to be honest, the balance, she had a Zimmer frame. That's what it's called, isn't it? Yeah, a Zimmer frame, which we would have to basically hold her hips to try and keep her from falling over. And that's where we were at, tiny little steps, which were being supported. And yeah, that's where we were at. She could not walk unless someone was holding her up.
And I don't want to gloss over how this must have felt as a mother. I mean, I know just when my kid has the flu and is sick, it's difficult, let alone, I mean, what was it like to see her go from hockey playing, active, chatty, kid to this.
Yeah, it was so crazy. And I think for quite a lot of it, we ran on adrenaline as a family. And it was, I found, we were sort of like looking for solutions. And then when it sort of went past 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I began to think, oh, wowzers, this is even bigger than, we initially thought. Yeah, it was it was a crazy time. I'm still quite knackered from it. Yeah, it was all the question marks. Like nobody quite knew, and then I went through all these dead ends as well. I did actually find a couple of like the reactive clinic, George, which I know in the US. And, I was like, because I knew I had to get someone to help us. I just didn't know who at that time. A lot of the dead ends were that the clinics only dealt with children 12 and over. That was a big dead end. Several options. It was the whole thing. I didn't really sleep for for 4 months. I'm gonna just put it that way. A lot of scrolling, looking up, researching, learning lots of things about the brain, which I didn't think I would ever need to know. Learning about the nervous system. Basically, her nervous system is her emotion. So what I learned was her emotional brain is causing, in layman's terms, traffic jams on the physical functioning of the body. So for Jodie's relationship with adrenaline it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Her fight or flight doesn't then go, oh no, everything's fine, calm down, go back to what is it, George? The parasympathetic. It doesn't kick back in. And at the moment she gets a fright, and it's still happening at the moment, just not with her walking, she'll get her other symptoms like slurring. The moment that adrenaline spikes, you see her body start to not quite do what it's supposed to do. Yeah, but that's why I was looking. I was like, well, nothing's broken, which we just need to tell the brain where to go again. I think that's what I put into AI, looking for, like, how do you tell the brain to tell the legs to walk again? Yeah, that's
as we talked about before, I mean, the AI told you about the newbie device, and that caused you to look up and find George. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, as I said, I was like, well, AI knows everything humanity has ever known about everything, so it's going to tell me what to do. And I just kept putting her symptoms in, kept putting them in. Soft wiring problems. That phrase I think is quite common in people looking with FND, because that then began to chug through information. I didn't even have the term FND, functional neurological disorder, was not given to us as we left hospital. I then got back in touch with the doctor and said, I found this thing called FND, functional. Do you think, and it was in it saying soft wiring problem, do you think this is what Jodie could have? And the neurologist wrote back and said, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, I think I missed a bit of this. Sorry, it's a bit jumbled. Tried to get to UK, actually, to Great Ormond Street, I think, the Children's Hospital there. And a neurologist then looked at all the tests done on Jodie here, which was very comforting, actually, and said, yes, all the right tests have been done, and I concur, I agree, it's functional neurological disorder. So again, that was another one of my dead ends, because like, what do we do about it? Yeah, sorry, I'm probably rambling on, but
no, it's all interesting. And just to clarify, did Jodie have any neurological symptoms at all before that day when she fainted on the field?
There's potentially a couple of clues that her body was telling us when she was a little bit younger, but minor. I mean, the teacher said one day in maths, she says she can't see the board. And I was like, oh, that's a bit strange. This is like a year prior to the hockey incident. And I took her off to the optician, and the optician said, well, if she couldn't see what she said she couldn't see, she would be clinically blind. But yeah, it was clear she was walking around and could see, but she was perceiving, in maths she struggles with. So she was perceiving that she couldn't see, a bit like she's perceiving that she couldn't walk. Well, she wasn't perceiving it, but yeah, the signals from what's the outside. George, you can explain this better. The signals coming from outside and not being sent to the brain and thought through in the correct way. And then the body's responding in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So we had a few clues to answer your question. We had only after this all happened did I look back and think, that maybe was a little something. But yeah, to be honest, the moment that all struck was the biggest, shock.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how NeuFit and the newbie can impact your life, please visit our website at www.neu.fit, that's neu.fit, so you can learn more about how it might integrate into your professional practice, how you can use it as a patient, and you can also connect with our team there.
I really appreciate you sharing in such detail, and also the way you describe it, because it speaks to exactly what the language you're using is very instructive in what's going on. It's like, I can see, but the signal of the brain, or the legs can move, but the signal can't get there to control. So it is a really interesting opportunity for us to learn some, extrapolate some lessons about the function of the nervous system, and a really fascinating story here. Of course, made better knowing, at least as I do. The audience doesn't know yet, but knowing how things progressed here. So let's transition over to George now. So George, Katie looks at ChatGPT and it tells her to try the newbie, and she reaches out and finds you in the UK, and you get a message from her. So tell us about your experience there. What are you received the message. What are your first thoughts on, what you'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, so we had an online consultation, and at the time I was working with FND and had seen some really great success through using the newbie. And when we had our initial conversation, I think we just aligned quite heavily on when I was sort of giving explanations of FND and how the newbie works, and how potentially the newbie therefore can help with FND. I think it had kind of aligned with a lot of what Katie had already discovered through her own research. So it's kind of like we were speaking the same language straight away. So then really it just became about logistics. And originally the plan was for them to come over here to Bristol in England, where I live and work, and do a week-long intensive. But we got off the call, and I'm pretty sure I went for a walk straight after, and was just kind of thinking about things, and at the time was thinking, right, they're going to have to pay for potentially 3 flights. They're going to have to pay for a week of accommodation, like a hotel near to where I work. But then the biggest consideration was taking a 9-year-old child with newly diagnosed FND away from home into a place where she was unfamiliar, the stress of a long journey and travel, jet lag. Like, there was just lots of things that were going around in my brain that was making me think that's just not the optimal way to do this, I don't think. And then I was like, well, there's only me. And I love traveling. I love seeing new places. And Africa's always been was always on my hit list of places to go as someone who loves nature. So I think I emailed back and just said, oh, might be like a crazy idea, but how about I come to you guys for a week? And Katie replied like pretty much straight away and was just like, yes, in big capital letters. And yeah, said that they have like a little guest house because they were living on the school campus of the school that Katie teaches at and that Jodie was attending. So she said, we've got a guest house you can come and stay in. And I was very, very well looked after whilst I was over there, which made it thoroughly enjoyable. And so then we just went ahead with planning. It kind of just became, when's the next completely free week that I had available. I think I had to like shuffle a couple of appointments around, which, like Katie said, I think was about 6 weeks. Booked the flights and headed over. So yeah, it was very exciting.
And then can you walk us through the clinical perspective there? So you arrive in Kenya, you go through some initial assessment with Jodie, start doing treatment. Can you walk us through the clinical narrative Actually, tell us first if you saw any wildlife along the way, along the way on your journey there.
Yeah. So, I mean, so on the flight over, the flight from the UK to Kenya is 9 hours, and I didn't watch one film. I had my laptop out the entire time, had my headphones on, just kind of like hyper focused on. I was like, right, I'm gonna create a plan, or at least a plan that I could go in with and then adjust as necessary. Obviously, when I got there and saw Jodie and assessed her, and started moving through. So yeah, did what I would do with any case, regardless of what the diagnosis is, to find what the end goal was and kind of reverse engineered back from there. You know, like, okay, the end goal is to help her walk again. So what do we need to do before that, until I kind of had this, I guess, step-by-step plan of what I needed to work through with Jodie in order to achieve the goal. And then built out from there in terms of my understanding of working with FND, because yeah, I guess that plan that I talked about is essentially a graded exposure to what we're trying to achieve. So a graded exposure to walking and standing for that. But then also with FND, there's lots of considerations that need to be made. For example, that often, because of what's going on with the autonomic system in FND, and also in terms of altered interoception. So often in FND, the brain's kind of interoceptive networks become overweighted. And so the brain kind of gets stuck in interoception and then struggles to switch to maybe more externally focused movement-based tasks. And so often if you tell an FND person to move their leg, they'll really struggle with that, and it can often make their symptoms worse. Whereas doing more task-based, externally focused drills can help them access normal movement more easily. So once I had that kind of skeleton plan, I had to build out from there and say, right, okay, well, how am I actually going to do this with an FND brain? And then also not only that, it was how am I going to do this with a 9-year-old kid who is going to want novelty and fun. And because we were doing 4 hours a day of work, we were doing a 2-hour session, or roughly a 2-hour session in the morning, having a break for lunch, and then a 2-hour session in the afternoon. So, you know, it amounted to about 20 hours or just over of treatment in a week. And holding a 9-year-old girl's attention for 20 hours was probably the biggest task that I faced. But actually made me a much better clinician afterwards, I think, because, you know, I made everything fun. And then, like, for example, how do you make a foot bath fun? You know, I came up with just drills and games that she could do while she was in a foot bath, which then afterwards I was like, why can't I do this with my adults? Because there's so much value in play for the nervous system in terms of neuroplasticity that, you know, it definitely made me a better clinician, having to think outside of the box a little bit. But yeah, so came up with a plan on the plane, arrived in Nairobi, met you guys in Nairobi at Katie's dad's house. And then we drove to Gilgil, which is about 2.5 hours. And yeah, I was saying to Garrett that at one point we stopped on the side of the road a car had broken down, a couple had broken down, so stopped at the side of the road, and I was kind of watching Mike got out of the car, Katie's husband, to go and help them fix the car, and then I just like turned to my left just to look at what was next to the car, and there's just a giraffe that stood right next to the car in the bushes. So yeah, I was like, okay, you guys fix the car, I'm gonna just get out of the car and go look at this giraffe. So that was my first kind of taste of Kenya and the wildlife, which was awesome. And then, yeah, we got to work the next day, had my first session with Jodie, just did some initial basic assessments. Firstly, just in terms of her function, mostly I'd seen that anyway through just observing her through the first like 24 hours of being with them. I was kind of just watching and seeing what she could and couldn't do, maybe where she felt, you know, where someone spends a lot of time is often where their nervous system feels safe. So I was already like assessing her from as soon as I got there, really. But yeah, just that first day was mostly about me gauging where she was at and then adjusting the plan as necessary. And then we went from there, really. Yeah, I mean, do you want me to talk through the week now, or do you want to go into something different now, Garrett?
Yeah, let's talk through the week. I really appreciate your methodical approach, you know, to this and the framework you're using. I definitely would like to talk about the week, you know, and specifically I want to hear, you know, I love what you mentioned there, George, about, you know, finding ways to make activities like practicing standing or walking, things that might be fascinating to you and me, but might be not as interesting or compelling to a 9-year-old child. Finding ways to make those. So I'd love to hear those, and then certainly about what you observed, when you started to see progress and milestones along the way. So yes, tell us please more about these 5 days of treatment, 4 hours a day, what you were doing, what you were seeing.
Yeah. So, I mean, generally with everyone that I work with, again, it just depends on what they need. But one of my principles is sensory first. So before I consider helping someone generate better outputs, and in this case, move better, I'm generally thinking, how can I help them process sensory inputs better so that the brain has better information to make more informed decisions from. And something that we know that's going wrong in an FND brain is, amongst other things, seems to be a lack of sensory input. I obviously mentioned about the overweighting of interoception, but there seems to be a lack of like the integration of extraceptive input and interoceptive input. So then what that leads to is the brain kind of overweighting predictions. So one thing we know about the nervous system is that it's predictive, and that it's constantly predicting what it's going to sense, and then also predicting what it should do in response to that. And yeah, because of the brain isn't getting great information in FND, often it leads to kind of overweighting of these predictions and a lack of ability to change them. So generally, in all of my sessions with Jodie, we were starting with what I would call more sensory focused practices and sensory training. So with the newbie, that was doing the foot bath technique to try and help her lower limbs send better information to the brain and to the spinal cord. But then in terms of making that fun, I would, for example, place cones around Jodie while she was in the foot bath, and I'd give her a stick, and we'd pretend she was fishing, and she had to catch as many fish as possible, and time her, and then she had to beat her score or whatever it is. She loved sports, so we were throwing and catching a netball, again, just trying to incorporate as many things as she would find fun and enjoyable, and also trying to add an element of challenge because she's super competitive. But also, like I said, play is just such a valuable tool for trying to generate neuroplasticity in the nervous system. So yeah, lots of sensory-based work, and then using the newbie. And obviously the beauty of the newbie is anyways, whenever you stimulate with the newbie, you're providing a sensory input. So basically anything that we did, not just the foot baths, was playing into that kind of sensory reweighting and retuning of the neurons. So yeah, then we started to, throughout the week, like I said, just gradually expose. We started doing a lot of things on the floor because that's where she felt safe. So a lot of drills on the floor, I use a couple of models myself in my own clinic. So one concept is deconstructed gait, which is where you kind of pick apart the gait cycle and the walking cycle into its component parts, figure out where someone is struggling and train those skills individually, and you can scale that all the way back to drills that when you're lying on the floor. So you're technically training movements that are specific to walking, but you're lying down on the floor. So we were doing a lot of that kind of work. And then the other kind of model that I use a lot is distorted gait, which I got this concept from a couple of very, very good coaches. One's Irish, one's American, where essentially my idea with this, and why I then contacted these guys to speak about it, was that there was a story of a guy who was recovering from a stroke, and he couldn't speak, but he could sing. And so the speech and language therapists retaught him how to speak through singing practice. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's kind of just like distorted singing. Like they're just distorted speaking. They're making speaking way louder and way bigger than it normally is. And so I thought, well, can I do that with walking with some of my neuro clients that are struggling with walking? Can we actually maybe make it way bigger than it normally would be, and maybe change the direction and change the amplitude, whatever it is, just distort gait from normal, in the hope that normal gait kind of becomes this really small thing and a much easier skill to manage compared to the distorted stuff that you're doing. So again, had Jodie down on the floor, inverted, doing like leg cycles and leg scissors, just drills that kind of look like walking, but again, it's distorted and pulled away from normal. So yeah, we did so much. I think it was, to answer your other question, the beauty of Jodie as a 9-year-old girl, my one concern was how willing is a 9-year-old child going to be to, one of the things about rehab is it's kind of a general principle that you need to, in order to force adaptation, you need to find a decent level of stimulus that's not too big that you cause maybe overprotective responses from the nervous system and potentially, way too much fatigue and things like that. But then also it's not too small of a stimulus that the nervous system just isn't going to change. And my concern was that working with a 9-year-old child, she wasn't going to be willing to receive a big enough stimulus. We weren't going to be able to work hard enough. Not that it requires you to work really hard, but yeah, for example, with the newbie, one of the obviously things that you guys teach and when you first get a newbie is that you want to do a lot of work at sort of like a productively uncomfortable level, where it's not super uncomfortable, but like you can feel it and it's there, and it's maybe like a 5 or 6 out of 10. But yeah, my concern was, is a 9-year-old child going to be willing to go there? And it just turns out that Jodie's like the coolest kid ever and was just fully on board and willing to go to those places. So I actually finished every session having taken her to that point where I felt like genuinely we could not have done more in that session, in that we couldn't have pushed her anymore, because she was starting to, I could tell that we were reaching that kind of point where if we did more, then it would potentially push her too far. And there was a couple times in the first few days where, for example, we would reach that point. I'd get her standing, holding on to something, and would be holding her hips. If I let go of her hips, she was going to fall over. And I was thinking, well, I don't know if this is realistic. I don't know if we're going to be able to achieve the goal that we want to this week. But then we'd come back the next session and we'd do the same thing again, and she'd be absolutely fine with it. And I'd be like, okay, her nervous system's adapted to this. I'd do it again and finish the next session and be like, oh, okay, it was getting a little bit shady at the end of that session. And then she'd come back and adapt it again. And I think it wasn't until we were in the Mara, Katie, so this would have been like Thursday, I think, that I probably started to think, okay, I think we can do this. I actually remember calling my mum on the Wednesday, so halfway through the week, and being like, oh, I don't know, mum, like she's improving, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get her walking by the end of the week. And then Jodie just did what she does and surprises everyone. And yeah, she's just an absolute rock star. So we finished at the end of the week. I'll tell the story of the final day that we worked together, where we'd got to the point where she was walking, she was up, she was standing, she was walking very confidently with a walker. She was walking reasonably comfortably with 2 crutches. She was walking kind of okay with 1 crutch. So essentially, once she was in standing, I was like slowly reducing the amount of assistance she had in standing to try and encourage her towards obviously independent walking. And then we finished the last session. The idea behind the last session was we didn't really do any training or movement drills. It was more, it was more role play. I wanted her to walk me through like an average day. You've just woken up from sleep, and you've got to get out of bed. You've got to walk to the bathroom to brush your teeth. She came up with these scenarios, and she was walking using crutches. She was doing really well. And I was like, great, I'm going to be leaving in the next couple of days, and I'm actually really happy with this. We've gone from her not being able to stand to her walking with crutches around the house. Like, this is great. We did a little bit of like independent walking, but it was basically like, Katie, I don't know if you remember, a little bit of a shuffle from like one end of the table to the other. She would very quickly let go of everything, kind of shuffle from one end of the table to the other. And even that was amazing given where we'd started. And then the final thing at the end of the session, she was like, I want to walk to the main area. So where we were staying, there was kind of like this central area where I guess everyone would convene. And she was like, I want to walk to there, and I want everyone to be there because I want to show them that I can walk with my crutches now. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't know if this is going to be a little bit too much, because although she's doing well with the crutches, this is probably about 80 meters of walking. And I think that might be a bit too much, but I didn't say no. I was like, okay, if you want to do it, then we'll do it. So I think Mike went and like told everyone, oh, Jodie's going to walk around the corner with her crutches. So I walked with her the whole way, and she was walking with her crutches, and we were chatting. And then she said to me, she's like, when I get to the like corner, when they can see me, I'm going to drop my crutches and I'm going to run. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to drop my crutches. I'm going to run. And I was like, I was like, okay, like I never wanted to discourage her. I was like, okay, that's fine. And yeah, we like turned around the corner. Everyone was there, stood watching Jodie's friends and her brother and her sister. And yeah, and then she did what she said she was going to do. She dropped the crutches and she ran, jumped into her sister's arms. And I think at that point we all just broke down after a pretty intense week. And yeah, everyone was crying. It was insane. Probably one of the best moments of my life, if not the best, for sure.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I want to try to hear, Katie, from you on your perspective on looking at it not through the clinician's eyes, but through the mother's eyes. What was your take on Jodie's progress during the week? Did you feel like she was making progress? Were you thinking the same thing, like, okay, he's going to leave and she's better, she's up and about, but she's going to be on crutches and still limited? Or, I mean, what was your experience of that throughout the week?
Yeah, when I started to look up the newbie and sort of learn about it, I just was like, well, this clearly is the machine that's going to fix her, because it's a brain signaling problem, and this is a machine that signals to the brain. And George, in all our meetings beforehand, and even when he arrived, kept trying to like just keep my expectation and maintain, not let me get too excited. But to be honest, he didn't really manage to stop me doing that. Jodie was 100% sure that George was going to fix her with the machine. Like, she knew. So in terms of her response to George arriving, luckily they got on like a house on fire. She just kept saying, when's George gonna, sorry, my cat has got out of the room I put it in. Do excuse me if it suddenly leaps onto the keyboard. She knew she was going to walk again from this with George and the machine, as we called it. George Newby was his actual name in Kenya, by the way. So then when it all started, and then I went in, because we started in a little gym just down the road from where we live. And I saw the first session. I was like, yeah, we're totally onto the right track here. And again, George going, we need to take things slow. And I was like, yeah, this is totally going to fix the walking. And Jodie's response to the whole thing was incredible. It was incredible. And do you remember, George, there was that like running machine, but one that's like on a dip. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah,
and she sort of got onto that and held onto the sides, and suddenly George and I, our eyes were like, whoa, and we try not to comment on it, because obviously you don't want to draw attention to what she was doing sort of spontaneously. But that was on the third day, I think, in the gym. Suddenly, and I was like, yeah, it's totally working. But that whole thing with dropping the crutches, it was ridiculous. She's quite a little showman as well herself, loves a bit of drama, and is competitive. So like all of George's fun games where she had to fish the cones and all of that, how many shots she could do, that just spoke to her. And she just loved every second, which meant she didn't think she was working hard. She was enjoying herself all the way through. Then this whole thing where she went around the corner and I was walking along with you, George, and Jodie was saying these things. And I mean, I was also a little bit like, this seems a little bit ambitious. But I mean, she ran easily, what was it, 20 meters? Dropped the crutches and took off and she's actually quite fast little runner, took off in a full sprint and then leapt into her big sister's arms. Gosh, it was hectic. Yeah, I just knew it was going to work. Sorry, George. I know you tried to manage my expectations, but I just knew there's a machine that talks to the brain in the language the brain understands, and therefore that's what's wrong with Jodie's brain at the moment. The brain was not telling the legs what to do. So thanks, Garrett, for inventing it.
I'm honored to even just be peripherally involved in this story. This is wonderful.
Peripherally.
I appreciate the, for you to like you talked about, all of a sudden you got interested in learning about the brain and the nervous system, and you weren't a physiology professor before this, but I think, the love of your child, and it's so interesting to think about learning. Like, I know when I was in school, I would go through the motions and learn, the material in order to get a grade, and then I'd kind of forget about it. And
Yeah.
now, now I learn about things because I'm interested and have a real passion or following that thread of curiosity. And so when you really care about helping someone you love, I think that's one inspiring thing here. And then, of course, to actually reach out to George and invest in bringing him down for a week of treatment and all of that, I think is wonderful. And George, I appreciate you coming on and sharing this, and your framework, the way you handled it here, the way you approached it, deconstructing not just the gait, but deconstructing the goals and kind of the whole process, and your framework, I think is wonderful. And one of my big takeaways here is how you were able to make what could otherwise feel boring and rote and methodical, and make it fun too. I think that's a really wonderful takeaway, and something that people listening to this can find ways to apply in their own practices with their own patients and stuff like that. So I think this was great. I feel inspired, and I was feeling some getting some chills at parts of this story too. So I really appreciate both of you coming on and sharing this. So Katie, as we wind down, what's next for Jodie? She's back playing hockey now. Tell us about her and what's next in her story.
Yes. So from after that moment of this crazy dropping with the crutches and running, we did have a bit of a reality check, didn't we, George, on the way home, which was a long way. It was a long drive, 4 or 5 hours drive back home, and Jodie went into a full FND, like dissociative attack. But it was just like her nervous system at that point went, crikey, I have just you've done the thing that I've been trying to stop you from doing for 4 months. But we watched, and we were all a bit depressed, and also we were stuck in a car, and we were in the back seat, and Jodie went into this sort of like a trance sort of like state and started doing all these movements, and it took about 5 or 10 minutes, and we were like, oh my goodness, she's redoing. She didn't know she was doing, well, she wasn't conscious of doing it, but she was redoing all the movements and the skills and drills that you'd been doing, George, in the gym and with the newbie, like bear crawls, by the way, in the back of the car on top of us, and like this whole thing. And she did it for like 3 hours, George.
I'm pretty sure it was 5 or 6. It was quite intense, but
yeah,
so
so we were a little bit glum after that. We were like, right, so Evandy's still here, and then we were terrified. Like, I remember that night thinking, what does this mean for? Are we going to regress back to not walking? And George was leaving the next day, and I was that was a tricky old night. I was like, right, when are we going to get George back? Because he's now leaving. Anyway, she, the next morning, woke up fine, and all the progress that had happened, it was almost like her brain was digesting the steps that had been taken. It was so intense, the whole thing. And just like almost cementing it in her brain, because her physical, sort of her walking and her running got back. And she used a crutch, I think, for about 2 more days after you'd left, George. And then, being the little show girl that she is, she then walked in assembly at school. We'd been borrowing school crutches, and she walked in with her crutches to school. And then she read the match report, I think, for her netball match. She had gone and done with one crutch. She'd held one crutch, I think. What had she done? I know, she played without her crutches. She suddenly announced she was going to play netball. I was like, what? And she sort of stayed near the netball post and held the goal post for balance. But then every time the ball came near, she would let go and would be sort of ready, and then she'd hold on to the posts again. But she was nervous with walking and was still on her crutches to keep, just for security, like a security blanket. Anyway, we did this thing in assembly where she read the match report, and then she said, and to the headmistress of the school, she said, Mrs. Boyd-Moss, I've been borrowing these crutches for a while now, but I don't need them anymore. And she handed the crutches over to the headmistress and then walked down the aisle back to her seat, which then the whole school was in, all the teachers, we were like, oh. And yeah, so she, in terms of her sports and her running and her that side of life, it's fully back. Like, she was quite scared of it being hockey term again. Funny, because she's done cricket last term and she's done athletics last term and she's done netball. But it coming back to the hockey term, which is obviously the trigger event a year ago, almost a year ago. It was in February, yeah. Her like other FND symptoms of slurring and facial tics have really increased in this last week. But she played hockey yesterday and today, and now the slurring's gone. We've had a lot better sort of those other annoying symptoms that get her have filtered away again. So it was just that adrenaline and worry and anxiety that was triggering some funny stuff. But nothing's ever, touch wood, really affected the movement of her leg. Like she is running. Yeah. So yeah, it's onwards and upwards of that. Hopefully George can come out again some point, and because I do think her nervous system needs reminding of what it's meant to do. In my layman's terms, it needs to be told, oh yes, if I do these things, it's not a terrible danger. I'm actually going to be fine. Brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, what an amazing story. I'm just picturing in my mind, her being in front of the school assembly and making that announcement and everything. It's getting emotional thinking. That's
Yeah.
so
That's one of the coolest videos I've ever seen. I'll send it to you, Garrett. I've got it on my phone. Yeah,
please do. What a fabulous just story and experience. So thank you, Katie, for sharing that. It's really very, very inspirational. And part of my hope and intention in recording this together is that this will inspire other people, families, children who are in similar circumstances where the traditional medical model isn't able to help them. There aren't really any good answers out there, and you have to dig a little deeper and find something. And if you do dig a little deeper and you find the right thing, it certainly can help them, as we saw here. So
yeah, I'm on a lot of in my scrabbling around looking for solutions and answers and help. I was on quite a few FND parents of FND groups and things like that, and I go their stories. People are like, oh, my child is struggling to walk. They've got FND. I'm like, find a newbie machine. That's all I just write on every single comment. Make sure, go and find a physio with a newbie machine. If you're in the UK, here's George. It's just, that people need to know. It was just, I knew it was going to work, George. It's people need to know, and there needs to be many more of these machines around, and people need to be able to get to them, so keep going, Garrett, please.
we will. Believe me, this conversation has renewed and deepened my commitment even more. So, great. And as we wind down here, George, what are your biggest, kind of reflecting on this experience, your biggest clinical conclusions, lessons, reminders, insights? What do you sort of take away from this experience from that clinical perspective?
Oh man, from a clinical perspective, I think probably the biggest takeaway that I immediately implemented into my practice was the games and the play, and using that even with adults, like you said. It was such a big realization and shift in my practice of maybe how, like, to be completely open and honest, like stale some of the things I was doing. Like, okay, yeah, firmly rooted in biomechanics and firmly rooted in neurology and great, but just can be quite boring. And so through looking through the lens of a 9-year-old child and thinking, how can I make this fun? From the play perspective is extremely valuable, but also from a clinical perspective, we know, the difference between, I use the terms top-down movement. So when you're intending to do a movement compared to bottom-up movement, which is more reactive and more closely resembles movement in everyday life. I think one of the big problems with rehab and traditional approaches to rehab is doing lots of great stuff that's all top down, but then people go into their everyday lives and you haven't necessarily prepared them for the bottom up type movement where, the nervous system is having to generate movement in response to things that are happening around it, all with a task in mind rather than the movement itself being the focus. And so, my big takeaway from this was really implementing more of that stuff to help people prepare for the environments that they're wanting to return to ultimately. I would say that was the biggest clinical takeaway. Yeah, I got probably lots, but that was the one that springs to mind.
Yeah, that's a great insight. It's one thing to be in a controlled clinical environment and one thing to be out in the real world. And when you talk about play, it reminds me of the polyvagal theory. There's a scientist named Stephen Porges who has done a lot of research and describes this framework, polyvagal, of course, poly meaning multiple, vagal being vagus nerve, about how there's different branches of the vagus nerve, and there's sort of this hierarchical system where for general healthy physiology, we should spend most of our time in a state where we have high levels of vagus nerve activity of the ventral vagus, where it's where we have high heart rate variability and we're able to partition effectively oxygen throughout the body to fuel the work that we're doing. And when that system gets overwhelmed, we go to the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, to mobilize energy to meet the immediate stress or challenge. And then when that gets overwhelmed, we go to the dorsal vagus, which is the freeze response, which is like playing possum or just feeling like one can't even get off the couch, extreme lethargy, chronic fatigue, that sort of thing. And it's typically that hierarchical where we're either in A or B or C, but there are a couple states where we can have multiple levels activated at the same time. And the biggest one is play. Play is the biggest state or sort of biggest example where we can have that ventral vagus and sympathetic, because we need the sympathetic to activate and mobilize energy if we're being active and playing, but we still have at the same time high levels of vagus nerve activity. So it's this beautiful balance where you have the sort of restorative health promoting effects of parasympathetic activity while still being able to tap into the energy that you get from some of those sympathetic hormones and processes and nerves, et cetera. So it's a really wonderful thing. So I think that is a big lesson here, finding ways to add more play, not only because it makes things more fun and therefore sustainable and more interesting, so we're more focused and we get more neuroplasticity, also because of these other neurological mechanisms that really set the stage for meaningful adaptation. So I think that was great. I'm so glad that Katie, that I got to meet you, and George. Always wonderful to reconnect and have another opportunity to chat with you. So I really appreciate both of you coming on. George, can you remind us, as the public-facing person here, Katie, I don't necessarily, I don't know if you have a social media account or anything you want to call out, you certainly can. But George, as the public-facing person on here, can you remind everyone your Progress Physio, your Instagram, and wherever people can find you, web and all that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so my Instagram is george.progressphysio. Also, my clinic Instagram is Progress Physio Clinic, which you're probably better off just following my personal one, because my clinic one is just me reposting stuff that I'm posting on my personal one anyway. But yeah, I'm pretty active on there, posting a lot about what I do and my thinking behind things. So yeah, check it out.
Katie, I don't know if you have any public-facing.
Not really. I had to suddenly, because we were we had to fundraise to get George out to us. So I all of a sudden had to get really into being very public, but I've actually brought it all a bit back down again. But George has a lot of the videos, and I can definitely send you some things if you would like to share them. Yeah, so I'm just wandering around on Facebook a little bit and on Instagram, but not officially.
Awesome.
We're actually, it's just to mention, it's in the pipeline for me to create some more content around this story and create some real high quality content as well to tell the story in better detail. So yeah, look out for that coming out probably in the next few months, which is very exciting also.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's on my to-do list as well. I'm like, this has been so crazy. I've got all these videos everywhere, and of the moments where she was in these like pretty serious states, and then to that running and stuff. I've got it all. It's just not quite. Life's been crazy. So one day we'll put it together.
Amazing. If you want any assistance with that, we have a videographer for NeuFit. We could potentially collaborate and help with some of that. But I really appreciate that. Definitely would love to share around the time that we release this episode. Would love to share some videos and things like that too, because I think it's just really, really inspiring. Lord knows I feel I'm leaving this conversation feeling very inspired and a renewed sense of vigor for the work that we're doing. And I'm just grateful to both of you. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
All right. And NeuFit Nation, thank you for tuning in to this episode. We will see you next time on the Undercurrent podcast.